Okay, so let's talk about installing Microsoft SQL Server. Now, before I do this, there's a couple of things you need to know. In my environment, I'm running inside Hyper-V. I have a single server set up. That server is running Active Directory and is a domain controller. Now, this is not preferred. They don't want you to install SQL Server on a server that's running as a domain controller. It will work. Okay, it won't stop it, but it will complain about it. And the reason is that SQL can be a fairly demanding application. So if you're running it on a server that's also your primary domain controller, what will happen is SQL Server can sometimes use up enough resources that it slows down your domain controller, which slows down your entire network. So their preferred solution is you have this running on a separate server. I don't have that, so we're just going to deal with it. Now, here's the other thing. I downloaded my SQL application, and you can go out and do a quick download, or do a quick web search for Microsoft SQL Server Evaluation, and you can download this file. And then I downloaded it on my desktop, and I just copied and pasted it into my server through an enhanced session. Now, that does not include the entire application. It actually includes just the setup application. So I'm going to have to download the rest of Microsoft SQL Server when I do my installation, which means this thing needs to be connected to the internet. But it also has to use itself as a DNS server because it's running Active Directory domain controller functions. So the way I set this up, and I'm going to share this with you just in case you want to do something similar. The way I set this up is I connected it to my default switch, so it has access to the internet through Hyper-V, through Oracle. It would be a NATed switch or something like that. So I set it up to obtain an IP address automatically from my default switch, and that's how I get out to the internet. But I told it not to use that DNS server. I said use itself as a DNS server because Active Directory needs to be able to talk to a DNS server that has Active Directory integration and everything that AD relies on DNS for. So when I go out to the internet, what will happen is it will query itself. It won't find the information that it needs, so that it'll query the internet and everything will work just fine. So a little bit of a funky setup, but if you want to do something similar, that's how you could make it work. All right, so now I'm going to start my SQL Server Evaluation Edition. And I have three different options here. So I can do a basic install, and this is just going to kind of be default, right? Give me the basic stuff and go with it. We can download the media, and this is really useful because you can download this application on your desktop, do a download media, and then you can download the entire thing so you could do an offline install, which is kind of useful. That way you don't have to go through the funky stuff that I just did. But it's kind of fun, so I did it anyway. And then we can do a custom install. And this is what I want to do just because I want you to see some of these options. So I'm going to specify where it's going to install, and it tells me this is minimum free space, download size, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I want to put it on my C drive. It's a temporary server. If you were doing a production server, it really might be worthwhile to consider installing it on a RAID array that's different from your operating system, just for better performance. But as a demo trial copy, putting it on the C drive is going to be just fine. So we're downloading our installation package. And this is what we could have downloaded to do with an offline install if we did not want our SQL server to have direct internet access. And there might be some reasons we might not want that. So we download our install package, almost there. And now we're extracting our setup files. And that is when the fun really begins. All right, a couple of little notifications here. Not going to worry about that too much. By the way, just want you to be aware that as I do this, I'm also going to do this as a local installation of SQL Server, and I'm not going to do anything that's going to cause Azure integration. Okay. Got that done. That closes. Here is our installation center. Okay. Ton of information here in the installation center. We have planning documents. We have links for installation, for doing a standalone or standalone installation, or add features, for reporting services, for management tools, for data tools. We have maintenance, we have tools, we have resources. So tons and tons of information here that we could go research, especially here. A lot of web articles we can go do a bunch of research on, figure out what we're doing. So very, very cool that they give you all of this stuff, which I am going to proceed to ignore, and we're going to walk through an installation. So I'm going to come to my installation, and this is the one that I want. It's a new SQL Server standalone installation. Okay, that's what I want. Single SQL Server, or add features to an existing installation. And you're going to see as we go through this, there are going to be some features that I choose and some that I don't. We can come back later and run this again to add some of those other features in. We can also install SQL Server reporting services. We can upgrade to a previous version, or from a previous version. We can add a node to an SQL Server failover cluster. We can create a new SQL Server failover cluster. All right, lots of options. We're going new standalone server. But now you see some of the other options that we actually have available to us. So this will take it a minute here. You know what? I'm actually going to pause this for a second while this continues. I just say that and there it goes. It gets there. So never mind. We're not going to pause it. All right. Specify how we're going to do this. So I can do I can specify a free edition, which is going to be Evaluation, Developer, or Express. I want Evaluation because we want all of the tools available. We can do a pay-as-you-go model through Microsoft Azure, or we can enter the product key. And if you have a product key, this is where you would do it permanently. So I'm going to do an evaluation because we're going to use this while we are experimenting and learning about SQL. So I'm going to click Next. Yes, I accept the terms of the license agreement. Okay, do I want to use Microsoft Update to check for updates? Nah, not at the moment. So I'm going to click Next. And here are our 4 steps. Okay, we have a couple of warnings. Number 1, computer is a domain controller. Yep, we talked about that earlier. We get it. It's going to complain about it. It will go ahead and do it, though. Here's the other warning, is Windows Firewall. Let me actually show you that one. Windows Firewall is enabled. Make sure you open the appropriate ports for remote access. Okay, fairly straightforward, right? Make sure that Firewall is turned on, but allow what you need to. Okay, fine. We can actually deal with that a little bit later. But this tells us right up front that's something you need to be aware of, so you don't go through, build the whole thing, and say, hey, why can't I connect? It's because we didn't allow ports through the firewall. We're going to click Next. Okay, I'm not doing the Azure extension for SQL. If I do, then I'm going to need to use an Azure login. So I'm going to uncheck that, and that takes the rest of this stuff out. Okay, here are my features. And remember I said we can do a base install and we can add more features later. These are the other features that we would add. So I need to do the database engine services. Got to have that for things to function. Then I can choose, I want server replication, machine learning, full text and semantic extractions, data quality services, analytics services. Okay, whole bunch of things that we can add in here if we so choose. I'm going to go ahead and leave it because this will function, and then we can just choose to add these in later if we want. Okay. Then we're asking for directories. And where's our instance root directory? Where's going to be our shared features directory? Okay. So doing the initial installation, we don't have to worry about that too much, other than choosing, do we want this to be on the C drive or not? And in this case, we do. So we're going to click Next. And then please wait while it verifies a few things. And now let the games begin. Okay. You can do multiple instances of SQL Server on the same server. So I can have basically multiple copies of SQL Server running. And then each copy or instance can have its own multiple databases. So In order to do that, I can either choose a default instance or a named instance. Now, obviously, there can only be one default. It's like Highlander. There can only be one. Named instances, I can have multiple ones. And so if I wanted multiple instances, I could say, hey, skip, you don't even have to have a default. I can say skip default, give me a named instance, and this is going to be the server for the company data. And then I can run through this process again. I can create another named instance for a particular work group. And then I can run through it again and do another named instance for another work group. So multiple different options if I want to run multiple instances of SQL Server on the same device, either physical or virtual. Now, when I go to connect to those named instances, I have to give it the name of the server and then specify the instance name. And then I've got to deal with multiple different ports that I have to open in my firewall as well. If I only need one instance, then I can just run with the default instance, and I can just connect to the server without worrying about the instance name. Now, again, we are setting this up for trial and learning. So we're going to say, yeah, default instance is going to be fine, and we're going to click next. That just simplifies our connection process a little bit. You can, by the way, have a default instance and named instances as well. So if you want to play and come back and add a new named instance, go for it. You can do that. Okay, here are some different service accounts that we might use. An SQL Server browser, that by default is going to be disabled. Okay, that's if we're searching for other servers. There's going to be some cases where you would need that turned on. It's a great service to have. You have the SQL Server database engine. If that does not function, the database does not function. So that's turned on automatically. The SQL Server agent we use to automate processes, and that is set to manual. In some instances, you might want to set that to automatic just so it's always active. I'm going to leave it for the moment. We can always come back in and change these later. So these are just services that are going to show up in your services applet in Windows Server, right? So if the SQL Server browser is not something you're using now, but later on you decide, oh my gosh, I really need that. Well, great. Then you can go back in and turn on that service anytime you want. All right, so I'm going to click next. And then we're going to look at authentication. Okay, there are two different types of authentication. Windows authentication mode will work with whatever you're running for Windows authentication. Now, I'm working with Active Directory, right? I'm an Active Directory domain controller. So I'm working with Active Directory. I can say, yeah, I want that. Then users can use their Active Directory domain accounts to log into the SQL server. If I do mixed mode, I can't do standalone mode anymore, but if I do mixed mode, then what that does is that allows me to create user accounts for SQL that are not user accounts in Windows. I'm going to stick with Windows authentication mode, but then I need to specify SQL administrators. So I can add a user, or I can just add my current user, say, hey, use me, let me be an administrator. Now I have to have at least one. If I don't, it's going to throw a fit and say, hey, you can't do that. Validation errors, I need an administrator. So I'm going to say add current user, that's going to give me, and then here I could add more users. You just saw how we removed it. I also can specify data directories if I want those to go somewhere other than the defaults. I can specify information for my temp databases, for memory usage, for file stream. Okay, that we can dig into a little bit later. So I'm going to click next, and here's my summary, and I'm going to click install. And it is going to run my installation based on everything that I just told it. Now, one thing we need to be aware of, and we'll talk about this for a second, and then we'll go ahead and pause. One thing you need to be aware of is when you do this installation, this installs the SQL Server database engine. It does not install management tools. And there's actually some valid reasons for that. But I want to tackle installing the management tool in another video. So let's save those reasons for that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause until this gets done with its installation, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, our installation is just about done. We're wrapping up a handful of things here. And once it gets done, we'll look and see what's been installed, and then we'll set the stage for installing the management tools. Oh, it's running an SQL configuration. You know what? Let's go ahead and do this. Let's click on our start. And right here, you're going to see some SQL while this is finishing off in the background. You're going to see some SQL tools. So right here, we're going to see the SQL Server Configuration Manager. We're going to see the error and usage reporting, import and export, and the installation center, which basically is what we launched with this. So the configuration manager actually gives us very, very few things. It lets us look at our SQL services and lets us look at our connections, but it doesn't actually let us manage the SQL server. For that, we are going to need to install another SQL management tool. So with that, let's go ahead and cut this video short. We'll let this finish up. The last thing it does is says, hey, I'm finished. So we'll cut this video here, and then we will come back in our next video. We'll talk about installing the management tool. Okay, real quick, I said I was going to cancel or stop the video at the previous step. Changed my mind. I let it continue to run. This is where we end off. It comes up. I didn't do any other input. This is just where it finished off. Database engine successful, SQL browser successful, SQL writer successful, setup support file successful. Okay, close. And that brings me back to this, which is actually in a different window, so it doesn't necessarily bring me back, but puts that back to the forefront. Okay, this time I really am stopping the video. Next video, we're going to talk about installing the management tool, which is SSMS.